Forget walls built to keep people out. We're talking about walls designed for a far more critical purpose, containing something dangerous, unstable, or unstoppable. From ancient myths to modern marvels of engineering, these structures stand as silent sentinels against unimaginable threats. Today, I'm counting down some such walls. The Gardens by the Bay Biodome Walls. Just south of Singapore's iconic Marina Bay, a very different skyline emerges, curved, gleaming, and entirely transparent. These aren't office towers or shopping malls, but the biodomes of Gardens by the Bay, the cloud forest and flower dome. Unlike conventional walls that shut nature out, these vast glass structures exist to hold nature in. The cloud forest, soaring 58 meters high and spanning 1.2 hectares, encloses a misty mountain cloaked in orchids, ferns, and tropical plants native to distant cloud forests of Central and South America and Southeast Asia. This ecosystem is delicately preserved inside a shell of 4,500 double-glazed glass panels supported by steel ribs and a cooled concrete foundation, a marvel of both architecture and environmental engineering. Every detail is meticulously calibrated. Hidden ducts channel chilled air, misting nozzles release clouds every 2 hours, and internal systems maintain perfect temperature and humidity. A single flaw, a cracked panel, or a sensor failure could spell disaster for dozens of rare species inside. These walls don't protect people from the outside world. They shield fragile ecosystems from Singapore's tropical heat. More than greenhouses, these sealed biomes are carefully controlled simulations of faraway environments. In an era of climate instability, Singapore's biodomes stand as quiet guardians of biodiversity. They are living laboratories, showcasing human ingenuity in conservation. Not fortresses against war, but barriers against environmental loss, they preserve the beauty and balance of ecosystems that may one day vanish from the wild, offering hope for a sustainable future. The flood walls of New Orleans, pumping stations. New Orleans is renowned for its soulful music, rich cuisine, and indomitable spirit. But beneath the lively parades and jazz-filled nights lies a city locked in an ongoing struggle with its geography. Much of New Orleans sits below sea level, cradled between the Mississippi River, Lake Pontchartrain, and the Gulf of Mexico. This peculiar setting means rainwater doesn't naturally drain away. It collects. And when storms strike, the threat isn't just from surrounding waters, but from within, as the city's own runoff becomes a danger. To combat this, New Orleans has developed a complex flood management system, including one of its most critical components, flood walls around its pumping stations. These are not the city's iconic perimeter levees, but massive concrete-reinforced walls designed to contain internal floodwaters within the drainage network until they can be pumped out. Take pumping station number 6, one of the oldest and largest, positioned at the 17th Street Canal. This site played a key role during Hurricane Katrina. Encasing it is a flood wall system built like a fortress with 15-foot concrete walls and deep-set steel pilings. It's engineered to retain millions of gallons of stormwater per hour, preventing that water from overflowing into nearby neighborhoods. Unlike levees that fend off external surges, these walls are inward-facing, tasked with managing the city's own stormwater. Many include emergency access ports and automated gates to isolate sections when needed. In most cities, gravity handles drainage, but in New Orleans, gravity works against it. These internal walls are not just infrastructure, they're a symbol of resilience. They remind us that in a city where the lowest point is inside its own borders, survival depends on engineering solutions that can keep the floodwaters, homegrown and relentless, firmly in check. The biosecurity wall of Plum Island. Just off the northeastern tip of Long Island, New York, sits Plum Island, an 840-acre stretch of land that most Americans have never visited but should definitely know about. Owned by the US government, it's home to the Plum Island Animal Disease Center, one of the most secretive and secure biological research facilities in the Western Hemisphere. While it lacks the battlements of a medieval fortress, the island is surrounded by an even more vital kind of wall, one built not to keep enemies out, but to ensure that highly dangerous pathogens never escape. Established in 1954 during the Cold War, the facility's primary mission has always been to study and combat foreign animal diseases, most notably foot and mouth disease, FMD, an incredibly contagious virus that can devastate entire livestock populations with a single airborne droplet. The threat is so severe that US law prohibits live FMD virus research on the mainland. Plum Island's isolation, surrounded by open water, makes it a natural containment zone, a biological Alcatraz designed to trap invisible threats. Over the decades, the island has inspired conspiracy theories about bioweapons and bizarre experiments, but these reflect deeper fears. What if the containment fails? After September 11th, national security concerns led to tighter controls under the Department of Homeland Security, making the island even more secure and more secretive. In truth, Plum Island's greatest story is about trust. Trust in science, trust in biosecurity, and trust in invisible walls protecting us from threats we can't see. A containment breach would wreak havoc on the US livestock industry, causing food shortages and economic turmoil. Plum Island doesn't just study viruses, it holds them at bay. In doing so, it quietly plays one of the most critical defensive roles in America's public health infrastructure: the biosecurity wall of Pirbright. In the quiet countryside of Surrey, England, surrounded by rolling green pastures and tidy hedgerows, stands one of the most critical and least known fortresses in Britain, not one of stone and steel, but of science and biosecurity. This is the Pirbright Institute, a globally recognized center for the study of highly contagious animal diseases, particularly the devastating foot and mouth disease, FMD. The 2001 outbreak of FMD in the UK, which led to the mass culling of over 6 million animals and caused billions in economic losses, remains a painful lesson in the catastrophic potential of these invisible pathogens. Pirbright operates at the highest levels of biological containment, with biosafety level 3 and 4 laboratories that rival any in the world. Here, scientists analyze deadly viruses such as FMD, African swine fever, and blue tongue virus. Their mission: to track viral mutations, understand transmission, and develop vaccines that could prevent the next global livestock crisis. But to keep the outside world safe, Pirbright must rely on an intricate web of containment protocols, a modern-day moat around a microscopic threat. The facility's defenses go far beyond fences. Inside are sealed labs held under negative air pressure to prevent airborne escape. All air is filtered through HEPA systems and sterilized using UV light. Waste is chemically treated and heat sterilized. Staff must pass through airlocks and decontamination chambers, don full-body protective suits, and follow strict exit procedures. Even water leaving the site is treated like hazardous material, yet even this fortress isn't infallible. In 2007, a strain of FMD escaped, not from a lab breach, but through a damaged pipe shared with a nearby vaccine producer, leading to a minor outbreak and a major review of safety systems. Still, the question remains: why take the risk at all? Because these viruses continue to mutate and spread across continents. Without Pirbright, the world would be blind to these changes. Its walls protect not only Britain's farms, but the global food supply, forming a critical barrier against the biological threats that silently cross borders and oceans. The wall around Goli Otok. In the sparkling blue of the Adriatic Sea, off Croatia's northern coast, lies Goli Otok, barren island, a seemingly unremarkable outcrop of rocky terrain and harsh winds. But beneath its sun-bleached surface lies one of the darkest chapters of Yugoslavia's 20th century history. From the late 1940s through the 1980s, Goli Otok operated as a secretive and brutal political prison camp. Its purpose wasn't simply to detain, it was to erase. Not bodies, but beliefs. Following the 1948 split between Yugoslav leader Josip Broz Tito and Soviet Premier Joseph Stalin, Tito's regime cracked down on any perceived pro-Stalin sympathizers. Goli Otok became a purgatory for those accused, often without trial or evidence, of harboring disloyal thoughts. The inmates were not enemies of communism, they were communists accused of being the wrong kind. Once sent to the island, individuals effectively disappeared. Officially, they didn't exist. The island's isolation made escape virtually impossible. Surrounded by freezing waters and jagged cliffs, Goli Otok's natural features were its first line of defense. The second was a crude stone wall that traced the island's brutal terrain, unadorned, utilitarian, and suffocating. But the most formidable barrier was psychological. Prisoners were forced into a regime of betrayal, required to spy on, report, and even beat fellow inmates who resisted ideological re-education. These invisible walls of mistrust, fear, and manipulation cut deeper than concrete ever could. Inmates were exposed to the elements, made to labor in the sweltering heat or bitter cold, and subjected to relentless humiliation. Many never returned, while others left irreparably broken in mind and spirit. After Yugoslavia's collapse, Goli Otok was abandoned. Time and salt air have chipped away at its physical walls, but no official monument honors those who suffered there. The silence surrounding the island remains its final wall, a chilling reminder that the most enduring prisons are the ones we refuse to remember. The Fence of Woomera. In the remote red heart of Australia lies one of the world's most mysterious and heavily restricted places, the Woomera Prohibited Area, WPA. Spanning over 120,000 square kilometers, larger than many countries, this vast desert expanse has remained under tight control for more than 70 years. While it lacks a visible wall of concrete or steel, Woomera is nonetheless one of the most securely contained zones ever established by a democratic nation. Its invisible boundary exists not to keep intruders out, but to keep technology, debris, and tightly held secrets sealed within. Established in 1947 through a military alliance between the United Kingdom and Australia, the WPA was created as a remote testing ground for experimental weapons and aerospace technologies. From missiles and rockets to early drone prototypes, it became a key site for Cold War-era research. Some zones within Woomera were used to test nuclear-capable systems, others became burial grounds for hazardous materials, chemical residues, failed rocket components, and obsolete electronic systems, too dangerous or classified to recover. Though its landscape is open and vast, access to Woomera is strictly limited. The area is divided into numerous high-security subzones, each with its own layers of fencing, exclusion zones, and surveillance. One of the most notorious is the Blue Streak site, where remnants of early British missile technology still lie buried beneath reinforced barriers. For decades, the public knew little about what happened inside Woomera. The Australian government imposed heavy censorship, and journalists or activists who ventured too close risked arrest. Even today, large sections of the area remain under tight restriction. Woomera's wall is conceptual but impenetrable, built from laws, secrecy, and legacy. It doesn't just guard active defense projects, it quietly seals away the unfinished chapters of a technological era defined by ambition, risk, and an unrelenting pursuit of power. The Exclusion Zone Wall of Chernobyl. At 1:23 a.m. on April 26, 1986, reactor number 4 at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant exploded, triggering the worst nuclear disaster in history. Caused by a deadly combination of flawed reactor design, poor safety protocols, and critical human error, the explosion released an enormous plume of radioactive material into the atmosphere, spreading across Europe. In response, Soviet authorities raced to create an invisible wall of containment, the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone. Spanning roughly 30 kilometers, 19 miles in radius, this zone was drawn around the reactor site to isolate the contaminated area from the rest of the world. Entire towns were evacuated, including Pripyat, a model city built for plant workers and their families. But this wall was not consistent. It shifted as scientists mapped radiation hotspots, revealing uneven contamination by isotopes like cesium-137 and strontium-90. Despite the danger and restrictions, the wall was never fully impermeable. Flora and fauna slowly returned, and even humans, known as Samosli or self-settlers, illegally came back to their abandoned homes, choosing to live in radioactive isolation rather than leave their ancestral land. Chernobyl's boundaries are layered. The outer exclusion zone, internal checkpoints, and barbed wire fences are physical, while the psychological wall, fear, taboo, and memory, is just as strong. Most profound of all is the massive new safe confinement, a towering steel structure built to encase the crumbling remains of the original sarcophagus over reactor number 4. It's a monument not to death alone, but to the ongoing invisible threat of radiation. Chernobyl's true wall isn't visible or climbable, It lingers in the air, the soil, and the silence. It is a barrier that separates us from a tragedy frozen in time, a place both deserted and dangerously alive, defined by what cannot be seen but must never be forgotten. The Great Wall of the Hanford Site. Along the Columbia River in southeastern Washington state lies the Hanford Site, a desolate stretch of desert and sagebrush that harbors the deadliest waste ever created in the United States. Covering nearly 580 square miles, Hanford was born in secrecy in 1943 as part of the Manhattan Project. Here, the US built the world's first full-scale plutonium production plant, and the plutonium used in the Nagasaki bomb came directly from this site. After World War II, Hanford didn't shut down. It expanded, adding 9 nuclear reactors and 5 massive processing facilities. For decades, the resulting radioactive waste was recklessly dumped into unlined trenches, aging tanks, and even directly into the ground and water. As awareness of the environmental devastation grew, a monumental effort began to contain this legacy. Hanford's wall is not a single structure, but a sprawling high-security network of barriers, fences, no-fly zones, and underground vaults. At its heart lie 177 underground tanks holding more than 50 million gallons of radioactive sludge, some tanks dating back to the 1940s. Over 60 have already leaked. Many are at risk of structural failure. The response has been massive, constructing modern double-shelled tanks, launching a complex vitrification process to turn liquid waste into stable glass, and enforcing strict perimeter controls. Access to the tank farms is limited to trained personnel. Checkpoints, drones, and warning signs reinforce the message. This is a zone of extreme danger. In the 1980s, fears that the waste might reach the groundwater led to an extensive monitoring system that continues to grow. Despite over $100 billion spent and decades of effort, Hanford remains one of the most contaminated sites on Earth. Its invisible layered wall must endure, because if it fails, disaster may not come with a bang, but through a silent, irreversible seep into the soil and water below. The Wall of San Quentin State Prison. Just north of San Francisco, where the Pacific Ocean breathes salt and fog into the bay, stands San Quentin State Prison, one of America's oldest and most notorious penitentiaries. Its most defining feature is its massive, unyielding wall, thick, cold, and immovable. Unlike modern prisons that rely on layers of fencing and surveillance, San Quentin's towering concrete wall stands as a singular, enduring symbol of containment. Built not to keep intruders out, but to lock dangerous men in, it reflects a chilling sense of permanence. Opened in 1852 during California's lawless gold rush era, San Quentin gradually evolved into a maximum security facility housing some of the state's most violent offenders, including many on death row. Over the years, the wall has come to represent more than a physical barrier. It is a moral and psychological divide, separating inmates not only from society, but from the flow of time and memory itself. Life inside moves differently, with the outside world fading into abstraction. In the 1970s and 80s, San Quentin became a crucible of radical politics. Inmates like George Jackson, co-founder of the Black Guerrilla family, smuggled out letters and manifestos that challenged the system. His 1971 death during a failed escape prompted the prison to tighten restrictions further. More guards, more concrete, more internal fences. Even executions took place deep within the prison, behind soundproof, windowless chambers, emphasizing the wall's finality. Today, San Quentin has embraced reform with educational programs and projects like the inmate-produced Ear Hustle podcast. Yet, despite these changes, the wall still decides who can speak and who will be heard. For over 170 years, it has quietly ensured that certain people, stories, and legacies remain forever confined within. The containment wall of Ass II, Germany. In Lower Saxony, Germany, hidden beneath a quiet countryside, lies the Ass II salt mine, a former industrial site turned into one of Europe's most troubling nuclear legacies. Originally used for salt extraction, then briefly for scientific experiments, Ass II became, between 1967 and 1978, a storage facility for over 125,000 barrels of low and intermediate level radioactive waste. Containing materials tainted with plutonium, cesium, and strontium, the barrels were entombed in chambers within the mine under the belief that the salt formations provided a naturally stable environment for permanent disposal. But ASA-2 was never engineered for long-term nuclear containment. By the early 1980s, brine began leaking into the chambers, an alarming development with dire implications. Water entering a radioactive waste site creates a dangerous scenario where toxic materials can leach into the surrounding groundwater, threatening ecosystems and human health. As scientific and public scrutiny mounted, so too did the fear that a radiological disaster was quietly brewing underground. In 2009, Germany's Federal Office for Radiation Protection officially declared what experts had long suspected: the mine was unsafe. The government committed to the monumental task of retrieving every barrel, a process expected to span decades and cost billions. But the threat was immediate, and so an emergency containment wall had to be built deep inside the mine to delay catastrophe. This wall, hidden from view and far from permanent, is merely a temporary dam against disaster. Engineers now face the near-impossible challenge of removing decaying barrels from a collapsing mine, an operation never intended to be reversed. Meanwhile, nearby communities live with the invisible, insidious threat of radiation. The wall at AS2 stands not just as physical containment, but as a symbol of the high cost of careless nuclear legacy and the daunting responsibility of managing it. The perimeter wall of Rikers Island. In the East River, between Queens and the Bronx, lies Rikers Island, one of the United States' most notorious and heavily fortified prison complexes. Although part of New York City, Rikers functions almost like its own isolated world, dedicated to a singular purpose: containment. Its defining feature isn't the sprawling buildings or internal fences, but the massive perimeter wall encircling much of the island's core, a literal barrier designed to keep people inside. This wall is not a single structure, but a complex assembly of towering concrete barriers, reinforced steel fencing, razor wire, and watchtowers. Some concrete sections rise as high as 20 feet, fortified further by anti-vehicle trenches, floodlights, continuous patrols, and security cameras every few meters. The outer wall, facing the shoreline and waterways, serves as the ultimate physical blockade. Built and reinforced over decades, it also combats the natural erosion threatening the island, once artificially expanded with landfill in the early 20th century, making erosion control an essential part of its containment mission. Escape attempts have been rare but notable. In 1981, 2 inmates crafted makeshift life vests from garbage bags to scale the southern wall and swim to Queens. In the 1990s, others tried breaching the wall with grappling hooks from a supply barge, unsuccessfully. Each attempt has led to tighter security and stronger reinforcements, further solidifying the island's iron grip. In recent years, calls for reform have intensified, with New York City announcing plans in 2017 to close Rikers and replace it with smaller, borough-based jails. Yet, political delays have stalled progress, and the wall remains, an unyielding symbol. Far from protecting society from external threats, Rikers Wall stands as a stark monument to the city's failures, quietly imprisoning its most marginalized and controversial inhabitants out of sight and out of mind. The polder walls of the Netherlands. The Netherlands is world-renowned for its vibrant tulips, iconic windmills, and picturesque canals. Yet beneath this charming surface lies a remarkable truth. Nearly 1/3 of the country's land lies below sea level. Despite this seemingly impossible geographic fact, millions live, farm, and build thriving communities on land that, by natural logic, should be underwater. This extraordinary reality is no accident. It is the result of walls. These walls don't keep people out or imprison anyone. Instead, they hold back a far more powerful and relentless force: the sea itself. At the heart of this epic struggle are the polder walls, an intricate network of dikes, levees, embankments, and engineered barriers designed to hold back water from land never naturally meant to be dry. These walls are massive constructions of earth, stone, and concrete, containing what the Dutch have achieved against all odds: vast stretches of reclaimed land called polders. A polder is land reclaimed from water, be it sea, lake, or marsh, by enclosing an area with dikes and then pumping out the water inside. The result is fertile farmland and habitable space, but its very existence depends on the dike system's integrity. Think of it as a bowl. Without walls, its contents would spill. Consider the Beemster polder, created in the early 1600s by draining a lake with windmills. Surrounded by a 40-kilometer dike, this rectangular farmland lies 3.5 meters below sea level, protected from storm surges and groundwater by constant maintenance and reinforcement. Without its dike, the Beemster would be submerged in days. Multiply this by over 3,500 polders and 22,000 kilometers of protective barriers across the country. Today, these walls are often hidden, camouflaged within city parks or neighborhoods, but they quietly guard the land. In rural areas, dikes stand visibly, sometimes just a meter high, yet hold back millions of liters of water daily. Powerful pumps operate non-stop, pushing water back over dikes into canals to keep the land dry. Dutch hydraulic engineering expertise has become a global model. Cities like New Orleans, Jakarta, and London consult Dutch engineers to design flood barriers that replicate this centuries-old mastery. The Dutch polder wall is perhaps the world's most haunting containment structure. It doesn't just hold back water, it holds reality itself, defying nature and time. Should these walls ever fail, the ocean will reclaim what was painstakingly stolen from it. The dike walls of the Salton Sea. In the arid desert of southeastern California lies a startling anomaly, the Salton Sea. Stretching over 30 miles long, this vast, tranquil lake exists because of a colossal engineering error. In 1905, efforts to divert the Colorado River for irrigation went disastrously wrong, causing the river to flood uncontrollably into the Salton Basin for nearly 2 years. This unexpected deluge created a massive inland sea where there had been none for thousands of years. When the flooding finally stopped, the lake remained, sustained by agricultural runoff, evaporation, and natural geological factors. The Salton Sea's containment relies heavily on colossal dikes, massive walls of compacted earth reinforced with rocks, concrete, and steel plates. These walls, weathered and cracked under the relentless desert sun, are the only barriers keeping the toxic waters from spilling into surrounding farmlands, towns, and wildlife refuges. Their condition is precarious, eroding slowly but steadily, threatening the fragile balance of this ecosystem. The water inside the sea is heavily contaminated, laden with pesticides, nitrates, and chemical fertilizers from decades of agricultural runoff. By the 1990s, the sea's salinity surpassed that of the Pacific Ocean, and by the 2020s it had nearly doubled, turning the sea into a saline dead zone. Fish die-offs became a grim routine, poisoning birds and disrupting wildlife. Toxic dust storms followed, with exposed lake beds releasing harmful particles like arsenic and selenium into nearby communities. Draining the Salton Sea isn't a viable option. The exposed lake bed would unleash massive toxic dust clouds impossible to control. Instead, efforts now focus on containment, dividing the sea into separate zones with additional internal dikes to manage dust and protect limited habitats. Driving along the southern berms today, the quiet, harsh landscape belies the tension beneath, walls weakening as they hold back a chemical nightmare, essential for the survival of the region. The Binhai New Area Landfill Wall. Along the sprawling coastline of Tianjin, a bustling Chinese megacity of over 13 million and home to one of the nation's busiest ports, stands a massive wall overshadowing everything around it. Unlike walls that defend armies or cities, this imposing barrier surrounds one of the world's largest engineered landfills, the Binhai New Area Landfill. Every day, over 10,000 tons of waste, from residential trash to industrial solvents, arrive here, building a mountain of garbage more than 70 feet deep in places. But the danger isn't just the sheer volume of trash, it's what tries to escape from within. The landfill is encased by a gigantic retaining wall, soaring over 60 feet in some spots, built with reinforced concrete, impermeable clay layers, and high-tech leachate control systems designed to trap toxic fluids seeping from decomposing waste. This wall wasn't part of the original design. Rapid urbanization and industrial growth pushed the landfill beyond its limits, increasing the complexity and volume of waste. Over time, gravity compresses the layers, producing a thick, toxic liquid called leachate, carrying hazardous chemicals through the trash. The wall's foundation rests on compacted stone and sand, while its core is reinforced concrete, vital for earthquake resistance. A swelling geosynthetic clay liner and plastic membranes form multiple defensive layers, guarding against leaks. Inside, the landfill is a living, breathing hazard. Decay generates intense heat, up to 70 degrees Celsius, volatile gases like methane, and corrosive liquids. Gas wells release pressure, but trapped pockets can crack the wall's seals, risking breaches. A failure would start as a slow, toxic seep, poisoning water and wildlife, potentially triggering a deadly landslide of liquefied waste, similar to a 2015 disaster in Shenzhen that killed 73 people. The Binhai landfill wall isn't temporary. It's a permanent containment of a vast human-made problem, an enduring symbol of modern consumption's heavy and hazardous legacy.